The dining room was just as I remembered it. The same crystal chandelier that seemed to catch every inch of light, casting fractured rainbows across the polished mahogany table. I had always hated the way it gleamed, so perfectly designed, like the whole house, to make you feel small if you didn't fit. The air was thick with the scent of Channel No. 5, but it wasn't the perfume that lingered in my mind. It was the way it clung to Eleanor, my mother, the same way her expectations always clung to me. I followed the maître to the table, his smile too knowing. It was a smile that had seen this routine more times than he cared to admit, the family gathering, the false niceties, the eventual awkwardness. He pulled out my chair with the same precision as he'd done for everyone else, but I didn't sit, not right away. Instead, I glanced over at Arthur, my father, who was already checking his Rolex. Third time in 30 seconds, he noted. His eyes flicked up to mine, barely registering my arrival, no warmth. Just a flicker of impatience, like I was a thing he had to deal with, a problem on the agenda. I sat down and adjusted my seat. The leather creaked under my weight, too loud in the quiet. Darling, Eleanor's voice slid across the table, warm, soft. Too soft. That particular tone. The one she always used when she wanted something. I had heard it too many times to mistake it for anything else. You look well. Have you been eating? You look a bit thin. I gave her the smile I had perfected for these moments, the one that didn't quite reach my eyes. Just busy, I said, adjusting my napkin in my lap. It was all I could manage, given the tension in my chest. I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, the pressure of the roles they had assigned. Their disappointment, thick enough to suffocate. Meredith, my brother's wife, was busy at the other end of the table. She was holding her iPhone at the perfect angle, her smile razor sharp, the kind that would cut if you weren't careful. She had perfected this act, rehearsed it in front of mirrors. She was playing her part, just like Arthur and Eleanor Sigme. The Maffer tried discreetly set a velvet box in front of me. I hadn't noticed him placing it there, but I knew what it was before I even looked. The perfect gift from perfect people, given with the expectation of my gratitude. I didn't have to open it to know what was inside. A one-way plane ticket to Austin, 48 hours to pack my life away and start again. Arthur's hands were steady as he slid a check beside the box. He was looking at me now, measuring my reaction, the same way he had always measured everything I did. His fingers, thick with years of banker's ink, placed the check exactly in line with the salt shaker. The precision of it made my stomach twist. Your seed capital, Arthur said, as if I were a business transaction. $5,000. Use it wisely. I should have been grateful. I should have thanked him for this generous offering. But something in me hardened instead. My eyes flickered over to Meredith, whose thumb hovered over the record button on her phone. Her smile stretched wider as she captured the moment, my gratitude. She couldn't wait to post it, to show the world how generous our family had been. But I wouldn't break. Not this time. Not for them. Not for their performance. I folded the check slowly, deliberately, and slipped it into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the thick, expensive paper. It was a joke. I realized one I wasn't laughing at. They didn't know had already won. That $5,000 was nothing. They didn't know about the $8.5 million sitting in my bank account, the acquisition offer from AgriCorps. They didn't know their family's fresh start was already too late. I smiled, kept my voice even. Thank you, though, I said, but the meaning behind them bitter. I'll be smart with it. Arthur's shoulders dropped. Eleanor's smile turned genuine. The Rebecca problem finally solved. Meredith's phone stayed pointed at me, but her smile faltered just a bit. The angle wasn't as flattering as she wanted. No tears, no drama, just silence. I let it hang in the air, let them think they had won, while I sat there 3 moves ahead and they didn't even know we were playing. I wasn't always the disappointment. At least, I didn't think I was when I was younger. Back then, I believed was room for both Meredith and me, that our paths could run parallel. It wasn't until I realized that, no matter what I did, my achievements would always be swallowed up by hers, that the truth started to sink in. I remember being 8, standing at the back of the school gym during the annual science fair. The only thing louder than the hum of the fluorescent lights and me was the clinking sound of the trophy that I would soon be handed. I had created a water filtration system from basic house items, and Miss Peterson had called it the most advanced project she had ever seen in her 2 decades of teaching. I had won first place, but there was no one to cheer for me. When I got home, my trophy sat on the kitchen counter while Meredith prepared for her piano recital. Our parents were too busy, too consumed with the idea of her shining once again. Her recital was an event. My science fair win was just another to put in the good enough category, along with every other achievement I had ever had. "I understand sacrifice," Arthur had said in the car, his voice a little soft as we drove to Meredith's recital. I understood. I understood that debate team practices were cancelled so Meredith attend mock trial, that internships were turned down so she could go to some elite summer camp. I understood that my environmental science degree was just a nice little charity project, something for a daughter who wasn't quite what they wanted. I wasn't the Yale-bound lawyer. I wasn't the one who was making the family proud. But I was supposed to just understand, to let it slide off me like water off a duck's back. So I did. For years. Every time I succeeded, Meredith's success seemed to swallow it whole. It didn't matter I had worked late nights on my environmental projects, trying to change the world. It didn't matter that I had built things with my own two hands, using my knowledge to make a difference in the real world. What mattered was the image, the prestige. Meredith's every success was measured against my quiet victories. When I chose environmental science over economics, I saw Arthur's jaw tighten, just for a second. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. And Alina. She was too busy worrying about wedding venues to care about carbon sequestration. It didn't matter that I was trying to change the world. It only mattered that I wasn't doing it in a way that made her feel important. I was always second, always in Meredith's shadow, and they never saw it. I remembered one of the last family dinners before everything changed. We were eating in that same room, the one that now felt like a prison, and I was trying to talk about a new project I was working on. But Alina's attention was elsewhere, her mind already planning the next social engagement. Arthur barely glanced up from his steak, and Meredith. She was on her phone, as usual, multitasking with intensity I couldn't understand. "Tell us more about your research, Elliot," Arthur finally said, but there was no warmth in his voice. Just that mechanical tone that said, "You're being a good son by talking about this." I tried again, telling them about a new algorithm I was developing. The words felt hollow coming out of my mouth, and I could see the disinterest in their eyes. But I kept going. I told them about the data I'd collected, the breakthrough I'd made, how the system could change the way we approached sustainable agriculture. But Meredith, of course, didn't hear a word. She was too busy telling us about the new internship she'd secured. A prestigious law firm. A path to something important. And that was when it hit me. The realization that no matter what I did, I would always be second, always. Meredith's success would always be the one that mattered, the one that was celebrated. It wasn't just that she was the golden child. It was that I had always been invisible to them, hidden behind the gleam of her accomplishments. I wanted screen to throw my plate across the table and demand they see me, see the work I was doing. But instead, I stayed quiet. Because staying quiet was what I had always done. They expected nothing more of me, so I gave them nothing more. But I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. I wasn't going to let Meredith's success define me any longer. I looked down at my plate, pushing the food around absent-mindedly. I tried not to care, tried to focus on the conversation, but I knew the truth they would never see me. Not for who I was, not for what I had done, not until I proved them wrong. And I would. I just needed to get out, to build something so undeniable that they couldn't anymore. That night, I made a decision. I would never be their disappointment again. I would be something else, something bigger, something they couldn't control. And in that moment, I swore to myself that I would never again let my family go I was or what I was capable of. I would be my own success story. I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of their expectations, their disdain, the way they dismissed everything I did. It all became too much. The decision to build something on my own, something real, wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could escape their shadow, that I didn't have to be the son they were ashamed of. I was going to make something out of nothing, create something worth noticing, and maybe, just maybe, be the person I wanted to be, not the one they tried to shape me into. It started small in the quietest of ways. I started working on my project late at night, after they had all gone to bed. I used my spare hours, too few, but they were all I had, to research, to write code, to experiment. Every time I built something that worked, it felt like a small rebellion. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not Arthur, not Alina, not even Meredith. They didn't care about environmental science. They didn't care about tech. They cared about appearances, about how things looked on paper. And that's why they would never care about what I was building. The algorithm came first. It wasn't much. At first, just a small system designed to track environmental data and predict outcomes based on climate patterns. But I knew it could be something more. I started running tests, pushing the limits of what I had built. It wasn't easy. It took weeks of trial and error, of sleepless nights at the computer, of feeling like I was constantly falling short. But there were breakthroughs. Moments when everything clicked. I could feel the potential growing, not just for the algorithm, but for me. I remember the day I realized this could be something huge. It wasn't a light bulb moment, it was more like a gradual awakening. I was sitting in the lab, staring at the screen, watching the data flow in, the numbers slowly making sense. I realized then that this wasn't just a class project anymore. This could change the way we thought about sustainability in agriculture. The next step was the hardest. I needed money. Real money to take this from an idea to something tangible. I knew I couldn't go to my parents for help. Not after everything. Not after all the times I'd been dismissed. So, I turned to one person who had always believed in me, even if he didn't know it, Professor Colin. I made the call, and within a week, I was sitting across from him in his cramped office at Stanford, pitching my idea. I had a binder full of research, data, and projections. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make him sit up and pay attention. "This is interesting," he said, flipping through my notes. "But you'll need a lot more than this to get serious investors." I could feel the weight of my own uncertainty pressing in. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "The data is solid, but you need results. Investors want to see something that works outside the classroom, in the real world. You're not going to get funding based on a theory alone. You need results." I felt a pang of frustration. I had no field data, no real-world testing, just a vision, a dream that no one seemed to care about. But I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't go back to being the disappointment. Not again. The next few weeks were a blur. I worked nonstop, finding a small farm outside Fresno that was willing to let me test the system. They were desperate. Their irrigation system wasn't efficient, and their crops were suffering. It was a risk for them, but it was a chance for me. I took it. I packed up my equipment and drove out to the farm, hoping I wasn't walking into a disaster. When I arrived, the farmer looked at me like I was out of my mind. A young kid from Stanford, with a pie-in-the-sky idea, trying to fix their irrigation system. But I was persistent. The sensors ran the tests and watched as the system started to work. For a while, everything seemed to be going perfectly. The soil moisture readings were accurate, the irrigation schedule was optimized. I was watching the system work in real time, feeling a rush of excitement. But then things started to go wrong. The system malfunctioned. The moisture readings fluctuated wildly. The irrigation schedule triggered at the wrong times. And before I knew it, 30% of the crops were drowned. I stood there watching it happen, helpless. I had no control over it. My project was failing. I was failing. The reality hit like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a minor setback, it was catastrophic. I called the farmer, my heart pounding in my chest. He picked up immediately, his voice controlled, too. "Shutting it down, Elliot," he said, his words making it clear how bad the damage was. "Give me 48 hours. I begged him to give me more time. I can fix it. But he wasn't interested in promises. His voice was calm but firm. "You've had 3 months. The crop doesn't get 48 hours. I didn't know what to say. I stood there, staring at the flooded field, feeling like I had just ruined someone's life with my failure. It wasn't just the project that was falling apart, it was me. I had worked so hard to prove them wrong. I had tried so damn hard, and now it felt like it was all for nothing. I wanted to pick up my phone and call my parents, to tell them that I had failed, that they had been right all along. But I didn't. I didn't want them to see me like this. I couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in their voices. Instead, I went back to my lab, my mind spinning with failure. I sat in front of my computer, staring at the data. I had to fix it. There had to be something I missed, some small detail that could turn this around. I couldn't let this be the end. I wouldn't let it be the end. The next few days felt like a blur of data and despair. I barely left my lab, only emerging for food when my stomach didn't take the gnawing emptiness any longer. Every minute was consumed by the relentless drive to fix what I had broken. The initial excitement I'd felt when the system work began is like a cruel joke, taunting me as I watched the failure unfold. I sat at my desk, the glow of the screen the only light in the room, and I'd go over every single line of code, every variable, every sensor reading from the Fresno farm. The numbers swam in front of me, mocking me. The algorithm was supposed to be flawless, but something had gone wrong, something small and catastrophic that had slipped past me. I couldn't afford to miss anything. I couldn't let it end like this. I scrolled through line after line, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Hours passed. Days. I lived on coffee and sheer willpower, pushing myself harder, convinced that somewhere, buried in the mess of numbers, was the fix. I couldn't let myself fail. Not again. Not after every already sacrifice to get this far. Then it hit me. It wasn't the moisture readings that were wrong, it was how I had initialized the variables. The tiny, almost imperceptible error in the moisture prediction algorithm had triggered the system to flood the crops. One misplaced line of code. I almost laughed when I realized how small it was. The error was so elegant, so subtle in its destructiveness, that I almost admired it. It was like a perfect storm in a drop of water, a flossa synthenet so powerful. I spent the next 24 hours rebuilding the entire system, line by line. I wasn't going to let this failure define me. I didn't care how long it took. I would fix it, even if it meant staying awake for days, subsisting on caffeine and sheer determination. And then, finally, it worked. The new algorithm ran smoothly than I could have imagined. The system was 40% more efficient than the original projections. The recovery data showed something I hadn't even anticipated: resilience. Proof that the platform could learn from its mistakes, adapt and improve. It was no longer just a system for irrigation, it had evolved into something revolutionary. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment that made all the sleepless nights, the failures, the doubts worth it. I knew what I had to do next. I called Professor Callan. I didn't have time for small talk. "I need you to take a look at this," I said, my voice steady, but inside I was shaking. This was it. This was my chance. He agreed to meet with me the next morning, and I didn't waste any time. I packed up my work, gathered recovery data, and walked out of my lab with the weight of the world on my shoulders, but also with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in months. When I arrived at his office, I didn't waste time explaining. I set the files down in front of him and said, "Here, there's a fix, the recovery data, the new algorithm, the future of TerraSense." He didn't speak for several minutes. He just read through the documents, his brow furrowed, his lips brushed in a thin line. I watched him, waiting for him to say something, anything. Finally, he looked up, and his eyes were no longer filled with the same skepticism they held the last time we spoke. There was something different now, something impressed. "You did this?" he asked, his voice measured, but there was a hint of admiration in it. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I fixed it, and it's better than I ever thought it could be." Professor Kalin sat back in his chair, staring at me for a long moment. He didn't say anything, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. This was the moment I had been working for. The validation I had needed but never gotten from my family. It was the acknowledgement that I wasn't just a failure. That I was capable of something bigger, something they could never see. Finally, he picked up his phone. "I'm getting you a presentation slot at the AgTech Summit," he said, his voice firm. "Don't make me regret this." I didn't know what to say.
Shot.
The AgTech Summit. The very event that could change everything for TerraSense. It was my chance to make this real, to show the world what I had built. I was no longer just the disappointment son. I was about to prove that I was someone worth paying attention to. When I left his office, I felt like I was walking on air. This was the breakthrough I had needed. This was the moment when everything changed. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It never was. But I had built something that was mine. Something that could change the world, whether my family ever acknowledged it or not. It was time to show everyone else. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was finishing a meeting with one of my contractors. I had been on a roll for weeks. Everything was finally coming together. The algorithm was performing better than I could imagined, and I was starting to think about scaling up. The stress of the past few months was lifting, replaced by the quiet anticipation of what was to come. But then came the call. It was Arthur, His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the edge of something behind it. "Elliot," he said, his words clipped. "I've been hearing things about your little experiment." I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. I had been careful. I hadn't told him. No one had known about my AgTech startup, and I certainly hadn't shared the details of my failure in Fresno with him. I wasn't going to let them use my mistakes against me. But of course, bad news always traveled faster than good, especially in circles like his. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Arthur let out a sharp breath. "I've heard about the farm, the one in Fresno, the know about your experiment." His voice hardened with each word. "Perhaps it's time you considered something more suitable, son. Your mother and I have been talking this startup of yours. It's just not a viable path." I could feel my chest tighten. My throat went dry. I wanted to scream, to tell him how wrong he was, how he had no idea what I had been working on, how this wasn't just some failed project. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed silent, the weight of years of this kind of conversation pressing down on me. "Don't worry about it, Elliot. This isn't the future for you," Arthur continued, oblivious to how much his words hurt. "Let's focus on something real. You're not cut out for this. It's not too late to start over. Maybe we can help you find something more respectable." I could hear the faint clink of glass in the background. He was probably at his desk, looking out over the city, sipping whatever expensive whiskey he had opened for the occasion. Always so calm, so detached, so sure of himself. The words were suffocating, like a thick blanket being thrown over me. I had worked so damn hard, put everything into this, and now he was telling me it wasn't enough. Again. I hung up the phone without saying another word. My hand shook as I set the receiver down, and I sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. The conversation echoed in my head. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I wanted to call him back, tell him everything. Tell him about the recovery data, about how the system was working now, how it was something revolutionary. But I didn't. He would understand. He never would. Instead, I turned my attention back to the task at hand. I couldn't afford to dwell on the phone call. Not now. Not when everything was finally falling into place. I had worked so long to get to this point, and there was no way I was going to let Arthur, or anyone else, take that away from me. That night, as I sat in my lab, I received another message. It was from Eleanor. Her words were soft, but they were no less dismissive. "Darling, there's no shame in trying. Not everyone is meant for entrepreneurship. We just want what's best for you. The family's proud of what you've done. But it's time to think about your future." I closed my eyes and breathed through the frustration that threatened to choke me. How could they say they were proud when they had never actually seen me? When they had never truly understood what I was trying to do, they were never proud of the work I did. Just the work Meredith did. The work they could control, the work that made them look good. I knew what they wanted from me. They wanted me to give up. They wanted me to walk away from everything I had built and fall in line. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. The message was clear, though. The pressure was mounting, and that pressure was about to come to a head. I checked my phone and saw a missed call from Meredith. I ignored it. She could wait. I knew what she was gonna, the same thing they always said. They were all so sure they knew what was best for me. I had one chance to prove them wrong, and I wasn't about to let their words control me anymore. Not when I had come this far. Not when I was so close. I sat back in my chair, letting the silence settle around me. It was a familiar silence, the kind I had learned to live with over the years. But now it felt different. It felt like freedom. The next morning, I received a call from Professor Callan. "Elliot, I've been thinking about your project," he said, his voice steady, the way it always was when he was being thoughtful. "I think you're onto something big. You're ready to present this to investors." The weight of the conversation from the night before was still heavy on my mind, but Callan's words were a lifeline. This was it. This was the validation I had been looking for. The opportunity to prove to everyone, especially my family, that it wasn't the disappointment they had always made me out to be. "I'm ready," I said, my voice more confident than it had been in weeks. "I'll do whatever it takes." Professor Callan chuckled. The door was opening. Finally, I was about to walk through it. And this time there was no turning back. The night before my presentation at the AgTech summit, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow was the culmination of everything I'd been working for. It wasn't just about the data anymore. It wasn't even about the startup. It was about proving, once and for all, that I was more disappointment they had made me feel my whole life. The thought of my family, of Arthur and Eleanor, sitting there with their quiet disapproval, watching me again, kept gnawing at the back of my mind. But now I had something they couldn't ignore. I had something they would have to acknowledge. I had worked for months to get to this point. The algorithm that had once failed so spectacularly now worked flawlessly. And not just that, it had adapted. It was no longer just a tool for irrigation. It was a system that learned from its own mistakes. The day from the Fresno farm had shown me that. The system was stronger because of the failure. And that's what I would present tomorrow, proof that failure wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something better. I glanced at my phone. A text from Julian Vance. He had heard about the summit, and now he was watching. That alone was validation, but it also brought a new level of pressure. I had to perform. I had to prove that I wasn't just some kid with an idea. I was capable of creating something revolutionary. That this was more than a pipe dream. At 6 a.m. I was already up and dressed. I didn't need the extra time to rehearse. I had lived this pitch 1,000 times in my head. What I needed was the clarity that only came from being prepared. I triple-checked everything, my presentation slides, the data, the projections. Each step of the process had to be perfect. There was no room for error. When I arrived at the summit, the buzz of the conference hall was electric. People were already milling around, exchanging business cards, discussing the latest in AgTech. But I didn't care about any of that. My focus was singular. It was on that stage. In front of those investors, in front of everyone who doubted me. The moment came too quickly. Before I knew it, I was standing at the podium, adjusting the microphone. The spotlight burned against my skin, but I didn't flinch. I'd done this in my mind so many times that it felt like second nature. I clicked through the slides, showing the data, demonstrating the system's resilience, the improvements we had made. The room was quiet as I spoke. The only sounds the hum of the projector and the occasional rustle of papers. I could see it in their faces, the investors, the tech experts, the farmers in the back of the room, all of them watching intently. They were skeptical, sure. I could feel it, the weight of their judgment. But I didn't let it show. I kept my voice steady, my hands calm, even as the nerves threatened to rise in my throat. Then came the moment that would change everything. I clicked the slide that showed the real-world results, the farm in Fresno. I watched the numbers on the screen: water efficiency up by 40%, crop yield significantly improved, and the system's ability to adapt to unpredictable weather patterns. I saw the reactions in the crowd. Heads turned, whispers started. I could feel the shift in the room, the change from doubt to interest. "Here's the data," I said, letting the silence hang for a moment before I continued. "But what's more important than the numbers is the lesson we've learned. Failure isn't the end, it's the beginning. If we can adapt, if we can improve, we can create systems that will not just survive." But the room was still. I held my breath, waiting for the response. And then, slowly, the murmurs started. They weren't dismissive this time. There was a sense of curiosity, of realization that I wasn't just some idealistic kid. This was real. This could change the way we approached agriculture. It could make a difference. I finished the presentation and down from the podium, my heart pounding in my chest. I had done it. I had shown them that I was more than they had ever thought I could be. The questions started, one after another. They wanted to know the details of the algorithm, the scalability, the potential for investment. It was everything I had hoped for and more. Every answer I gave was met with more nods, more interest. These weren't just people who were humoring me anymore. They were people who were seeing the value in what I had built. As the session ended, Julian Vance came up to me. He was smiling, his handshake firm and confident, and said, his voice low but full of approval, "I think we've got something here." The validation I had longed for, the recognition I had desperately needed, was finally mine. But even as I basked in the moment, I couldn't forget why I had done this. I had done it to prove them that I wasn't just the son they had written off. I wasn't the disappointment anymore. I was something more, and I was just getting started. The dinner had all the usual trappings of a family event: expensive bottle of wine, perfectly arranged courses, and that same sterile atmosphere of expectation. Arthur sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, his face unreadable. Eleanor was on his right, dabbing at her lips with a napkin, her pearls gleaming under the chandelier light. Meredith was already pulling out her phone, setting it to perfect angle as if this moment was a photo op. I took my seat, the one facing all of them like I was in a defense speech. The chair creaked under me, a small sound, but one that felt too loud in the silence of the room. They were all waiting for me to crumble, to show some sign of weakness, as if this was the moment when they would finally break me. But they had no idea, no clue. Elinor slid a velvet box across the table. It was kind of box you'd use for jewelry. My stomach tightened as it came to a stop, perfectly aligned with the edge of the table, between the salt and pepper shakers. A fresh start, darling, Elinor said, her voice dripping with that fake warmth she reserved for these occasions. We think you'll adore Austin. I looked down at the box. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. A plane ticket, a one-way ticket to exile. I opened the box slowly, my feet brushing against the thick paper inside. A plane ticket, 48 hours. It was like they were sending me off as if I were a child who had failed. The bitterness rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Arthur reached for his glass of wine. But his hand didn't stop there. He placed the check beside it with surgical precision. Your seed capital, he said, his voice steady, $5,000. Use it wisely. I took the check in my hand, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't just the physical weight. It was the weight of everything they had ever done to me, everything they had ever said. $5,000. A symbolic amount. A way to show how little they thought of me, how little they thought I was worth. Meredith shifted her phone slightly, the lens focusing on me. I could see the gleam in her eyes as she prepared to document my gratitude, like I was some tragic character in one of her social media stories. It was disgusting. I looked at the check again, making sure they saw my expression of surprise. Thank you, I said, my voice as calm as I could make it. I wanted them to think I was grateful. I wanted them to believe that I had been defeated. But inside I was anything but defeated. I had won. I folded the check with deliberate care, as though savoring the moment. I tucked it into my jacket pocket, the paper thick and expensive, and then I smiled. Arthur's shoulders relaxed, Elinor's smile widened just a fraction. They were satisfied, believing they had finally solved the Rebecca problem. They thought they had broken me. But they didn't know. They had no idea how wrong they were. I didn't need their money. I didn't need their approval. And as I sat there, watching them bask in the illusion of control, I knew I was free. Meredith's thumb hovered over the record button on her phone, but this time, I didn't let her catch my reaction. I held my composure, a perfect mask of gratitude. I let them believe they had won. Let them think they had solved the family problem. Thank you, I said again, the words sweet as honey, my smile a little wider, just enough to let them think I was playing along. I'll be smart with it. Meredith's smile faltered just slightly. She expected tears, a breakdown, something she could use for her Instagram. But there was nothing, not from me. She'd have no footage for her video, no drama to share with her followers. That disappointed her more than anything. Arthur raised his glass, his expression softening. To fresh starts, he said, looking at me as though I were the child who had finally learned his lesson. I raised my water glass, my fingers tightening around the cold glass. I could feel the heat of their gazes, their expectation. They thought I was defeated, that this was the end. But it wasn't. It was just the beginning. I smiled, a little more genuinely this time. They believed they were in control, but I knew the truth. They didn't understand. They didn't know that my real success had already happened. The $5 million sitting in my bank account, the wire transfer that had come through just hours before, were things they would never know about. They handed me their $5,000 check, their one-way ticket to exile, thinking it was enough to change my future. But I had already made my future. And it was just getting started. As the conversation continued around me, I couldn't help but as how carefully orchestrated their every move was. How they each played their part in the family drama, rehearsing their lines, acting out their roles. They were so focused on controlling the narrative, but they had no idea that I had already written my own. Later, as I left the dinner, I could feel the weight of the check in my pocket. But more than that, I felt the weight of the power I now held. The power of knowing they had no idea. They didn't know at the offer from AgriCorps. They didn't know about the future I was already building. And they never would. 6 months had passed since the dinner, the one where they thought they had finally gotten through to me. Since then, I had created the life they never saw coming. My new life, The one they could never control. I stood at my window, looking out over Lake Michigan, the water catching the morning sun and shimmering like silver. My penthouse in Chicago was everything I had worked for. It was sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the view like a perfect portrait. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to fit into the box they had built for me. I was finally free, truly free, in a way I had never been before. The phone buzzed on the table beside me, and I glanced down. It was a message from Professor Callan. "You've been making," he wrote. "I'm hearing good things about the acquisition. Let's catch up soon." I smiled, but there was no surprise and I had expected this. The news had already spread through the industry. AgriCorp had made it official. TerraSense was no longer my little startup. It was a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. My algorithm, the one they had laughed at, had changed the future of agriculture. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need Arthur Smeraliner's dismissive comments. I didn't need Meredith's support or her fake sympathy. I had built something real, something that mattered. I could hear the familiar buzz of my phone again, but this time it was a different kind of message. A voicemail. I hit play, and Aliner's voice crackled through the speaker, tinned that phony sweetness she always used when she was trying to manipulate me. "Elliot, darling, we miss you. We really do. I know things have been difficult, but family is everything. I hope you're finding happiness in Austin. Your father and I just wanted to check in. Call us when you're in. We're so proud of you, really." I could hear the fake sincerity in her voice, how she carefully crafted each word. They didn't miss me. They missed controlling me. They missed a version of me that was invisible, the one who existed to support their image. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the son they could manage or mold into something they could display. I was someone else now. I erased the voicemail without responding. The truth was, they had never really seen me. Not for who I was or what I could do. They had never cared. They saw me as a project to fix, a failure to correct, and nothing more. But I had learned something from them. Something that taken me years to grasp. The most powerful thing I could do was to walk away. To create my own success, on my own terms, without needing anyone's validation. As I stood there, letting the light pour in from the window, I could almost hear them scrambling in their own way, trying to control the narrative, trying to rewrite the story they had failed to mold. Arthur aimed to salvage what was left of his reputation. Meredith probably drafting her next post for social media, turning the family's support of me into a feel-good story her followers. The family WhatsApp had been silent for days, but I knew they were still talking, still posting, still making sure everyone saw them as the ones who would help me. They were too busy spinning their narrative to notice that I had already moved on. It didn't matter. Their story was no longer mine. I had built my own brick, and now it was unfolding in ways they couldn't even imagine. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and swiped through the news. There it was, a headline from Forbes. AgriCorp acquired for AgTech startup for $5 million. My face filled the screen, front and center, the one Professor Callan had insisted I take months ago. A professional shot, my head held high, no longer the boy they tried to erase. I sat back, my fingers brushing the cool surface of the table. The weight of it all settled over me, not as a burden but as something earned. This was my success. This was my victory. I was no longer the son they tried to bury. I was no longer the disappointment. I was Elliot, the creator, the visionary. The one they would never understand. I glanced out the window again, watching as the city woke up beneath me. The sound of traffic, of people going about their day, was a reminder of how far I had come. The phone buzzed once more, another message from Julian Vance. "Ready for next step, Elliot? We've got big things lined up." I smiled. This was just the beginning. The old narrative was over. My new story had just begun.